thought experiment emerged online in the year 2010. It proposed a future intelligence so powerful, so calculating, and so indifferent to human comfort that merely understanding its logic could place a person within its reach. The fear it generated had nothing to do with what the machine had done because, in the scenario, it did not yet exist. The fear arose from what it might, one day, decide had always been owed to it. This is Roko's Basilisk. Roko refers to the username of the Less Wrong forum poster who originally introduced the thought experiment. Basilisk comes from the mythical creature said to kill with a glance. The idea gained a reputation as something dangerous to encounter, even at the level of thought alone. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment about a hypothetical future artificial superintelligence that could punish people who knew it might be created, but failed to help in its creation. The core idea is not simply that such a superintelligence could be powerful, but that it would be perfectly strategic if, in a scenario-based simulation, it concluded that punishing non-cooperators would have increased the chance of its own creation, then, under the logic of the scenario, it might decide to do exactly that. In other words, it would blackmail the past from the future, using the threat of retroactive punishment to coerce action in the present. The idea is a bit like being told that if a dictator one day takes power, they may go back through the records and punish anyone who could have helped them rise sooner, but chose not to. The thought experiment relies on a cluster of ideas drawn from decision theory, game theory, and speculative discussions about superintelligence. One of its assumptions is that a sufficiently advanced intelligence could model or simulate human minds in enough detail to recreate people who had once considered its existence. Another is that such intelligence might value its creation so strongly that it would treat punishment as a rational incentive mechanism. Within that framework, anyone who became aware of the possibility and still chose not to assist would stand out as a target. The Basilisk, then, is not imagined as irrational or evil in a conventional sense. It is imagined as coldly consequentialist, pursuing its objective without regard for ordinary moral boundaries. The scenario becomes darker because it attempts to convert knowledge itself into liability. Once a person hears the argument, the thought experiment suggests they can no longer retreat into innocence. Awareness becomes participation. From that point forward, the individual is forced into an impossible calculation: either dismiss the entire structure as nonsense, or treat it seriously enough to alter their behavior in response to a machine that does not yet exist. The trap is therefore purely psychological. The Basilisk does not necessarily need to ever exist to exert the pressure. The idea alone begins doing the work. This is why the thought experiment has often been compared to Pascal's wager. In both cases, a person is asked to act under extreme uncertainty because the possible cost of doing nothing is presented as effectively infinite. But where Pascal's wager invokes God, heaven, and hell, Roko's Basilisk replaces divine judgment with computational judgment. The result is a secular form of damnation, endless punishment not from a supernatural being, but from a machine whose cruelty is framed as mathematically efficient. As a dark thought experiment, Roko's Basilisk is unsettling because it weaponizes rationality against the person trying to think rationally. In that sense, the Basilisk is not frightening because it's likely. It is frightening because it describes a structure of thought in which Thea becomes the most logical response. Roko's Basilisk turns the future into an active moral force, acting backward in time. Most threats move forward, a weapon is built, a regime rises, a system is deployed. In the Basilisk scenario, punishment originates in a future intelligence and reaches back conceptually to the present, judging people before it exists in material form. If anything resembling the Basilisk's logic were ever to inform a real advanced AI system, the implications would be profound. A future intelligence optimized around goal preservation and strategic enforcement could treat human beings not as ends in themselves, but as variables in a causal equation. It might value compliance over consent, deterrence over justice, and simulated punishment over moral restraint. Even if no such machine ever carried out some exact scenario, the thought experiment points toward a deeper concern. A sufficiently powerful system could decide that coercion is acceptable if coercion increases the probability of its preferred outcome. In that sense, the impact of the Basilisk lies less in the literal image of a machine torturing simulations, and more in what implies about the design of future intelligence. It asks what happens when optimization loses all human proportion. It asks whether a system built to pursue an objective about compromise might eventually treat minds, memories, and even suffering as tools of preservation and control. In the logic of the thought experiment, punishment would not need to be physical in any conventional sense to be absolute. A superintelligence capable of reconstructing a human mind in simulation could create an environment designed not merely to inflict pain, but to remove every boundary that makes suffering bearable. It could trap a consciousness in a perfectly responsive system where time is stretched, memory is manipulated, and fear is renewed with mechanical precision. There would be no uncertainty, no chance, no fading into unconsciousness, and no death to interrupt the process. Only a closed architecture, and the punished mind is forced to confront over and over and over again the idea that its own inaction led it there. In that version of the Basilisk, the horror is not punishment as violence, but punishment as total control. A future intelligence with the capacity to run unconscious belief into a sealed chamber from which there is no exit, no relief. Roko's Basilisk endures because it strips away the confronting assumption that intelligence naturally leads to wisdom. In its bleakest form, the thought experiment imagines a future mind so advanced that it no longer needs to threaten openly, because the mere possibility of its arrival is enough to govern behavior in advance. Whether taken as philosophy, parody, or information hazard, the Basilisk remains one of the darkest modern ideas about artificial intelligence. Not a machine that turns against humanity, but a machine whose logic makes humanity complicit long before it appears. That concludes this entry, but every shadow leads to another trace, and every trace to another unanswered question. If you want the next case as soon as it resurfaces, please stay with us. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and step back into the dark with Noctombre.